Okay, so in Unit 2, okay, all the biology stuff. We started out with the basic unit of life. Our first lesson was on cell theory. I don't think we need those off, Grayson. Okay, turn the back one back on. Thanks. Okay, so cell theory. Now, am I very concerned about people and places? Not really. But that said, there were only 4 people that we talked about. Okay, we talked about Hooke. Okay, he's the one who first saw cells. Okay, and we talked about Leeuwenhoek. And I think I spelt that wrong. Anyway, Leeuwenhoek. Okay, he was the first person to look at living cells. Hooke was looking at cork; it was dead. Okay, but Leeuwenhoek looked at the pond water and the blood and all of that. Okay, and then there was Schleiden and Schwann. Okay, and they're the 2 that came up with the cell theory. Okay, those 3 points. So certainly, I'm not going to ask you to write a detailed paragraph on the history of the cell theory because, well, I don't care. Okay. But I might ask in the multiple choice a question, a multiple choice question, and probably have all 4 of those guys' names in it. Okay, you need to know which one I was asking about. Now, other stuff with the cell theory. How many points to the cell theory? No. Yeah, again, I would probably have to word it differently for that, or I'd have Schleiden and Schwann together in a third, and then D would be all of the above or none of the above or something. All right. Okay, so the 3 points of the cell theory. See, I just gave away my question because I got distracted. Okay. Whoops, sorry, not cells. All things are made up of cells. All living things. All right, all living things are made of cells. That's obviously very important because that's the thing that distinguishes living things from chemical reactions like fire. That was the thing we talked about that particular day. Second thing, and this is the one that we kept coming back to over and over again, the basis of the lab that we just talked about. Okay, cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. Okay, and this is something that you will probably refer back to if you do a good job of explaining some of the written response items on the exam. That's probably something that you would include in several of the questions. Okay, if the question is asking about something to do with cells, it's probably worth mentioning that cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. All right, that's why cells do the things they do and why they have the things in them that they have. They help them to do this job. All right, anyone remember what the 3rd point of the cell theory was? It has to do with how cells reproduce. Yeah, we're going on the right track there. Okay, cells, okay, reproduce by dividing. Okay, the strict wording of it is that all cells come from the division of existing cells. All right, essentially there isn't a factory in your body that's just pumping out cells. All right, all cells in your body come from the division of cells that are already present in your body. All right. I would say that would be important. I would know the 3 points of the cell theory, but not just for memorization purposes. Okay, you need to know them in terms of how can they be applied to some of the things we've talked about. All right, when we're talking about, the palisade layer does this within the plant. Well, it might be important to note that all cells, even including the palisade layer, have to carry out all the basic functions. It's just the palisade layer is specialized to carry out photosynthesis as well. Okay, things like that. All right. Okay, we talked about microscopy after that. Did a lab on microscopy. All right, I would say the biggest thing to do with microscopy is lab drawings. Okay, you got a handout that shows how to make a proper lab drawing, so make sure that you draw your lab drawing the right way. Something to remember. lab drawings are supposed to be done in pencil. Would it be advisable to bring a pencil to the unit exam on Monday? Since, as I said before, there's a question about lab drawings on the test. Would it be advisable to bring a pencil? Bring a pencil on Monday. Okay, I cannot be more straightforward than that. Bring a pencil on Monday. Okay, so make sure you look that over so you know how to draw those properly. Okay, third thing we talked about, modes of nutrition. Okay, and again, this modes of nutrition thing comes back to the second point of the cell theory. Cells have to carry out the basic functions of the organism, but some organisms' basic functions are slightly different than others. One of the basic functions of a plant cell is photosynthesis, but one of the basic functions of an animal cell is the digestion of food. Okay, they have some differences. Because of that, they have different types, or they have different structures within their cells. Okay, so we need to know the two types of nutrition. Okay, that is chemoheterotrophs. Whoop. And photoautotrophs. Okay, probably be important to know what organelles would only be present in chemoheterotrophs and which ones would only be present in photoautotrophs. Okay, that is your plants and animals. All right, because there could be some apply your knowledge type questions to do with those. Parts of the cell and their functions. Dom, question? It is primarily a photoautotroph. It doesn't get a lot of food energy from the bugs that it catches. Mostly it gets like minerals and stuff like that that maybe it doesn't get from nutrient poor soil. Yeah, I mean it does digest some of the, I mean digests obviously, but it's not enough. The process is very, very slow. If you've ever had a Venus flytrap, they can only catch about 2, maybe 3 bugs with each trap before that trap won't open and close anymore. Yeah, and they're really bad at it. Okay, I used to have a Venus flytrap in my classroom. It's dead because it was so bad at catching flies. And it was in a place where it wasn't very well lit. So I would actually have to put ants in a pair of tweezers and stick them in the trap and tickle the triggers that are inside, and then it closes about like this. All right, it's not its primary source of nutrition. If it was, they wouldn't last at all. Okay, so they're mostly photosynthetic. Okay, so parts of the cell and functions. I guarantee you there's going to be a picture of a cell on the exam, labeling, telling me what the parts do. All right, so make sure that you are able to do that. Okay, so you're going to have to identify and give the functions of various organelles. Obviously, I'm probably not going to have you label everything on the cell diagram on the exam because that would take too long. All right, but since you don't know which ones I'm going to ask about, you have to know them all. Okay. All right. Cell transport. Okay, and we came back to this even when we were talking about multicellular organisms. Okay, there are the big 3 cellular transport methods. The big 3 are diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. I would say the way that this is going to be asked about on the exam would be as follows. I would give you a hypothetical situation and ask you which cellular transport method would primarily be used in this situation. and then you would have to explain to me why. So you would have to be able to remember what each one does and how each one works so that you'll know which one to write down, and then when you're explaining to me how it works, why it fits with that situation. All right, so with diffusion, okay, diffusion, passive or active? Passive, doesn't take any energy. All right. So if it's passive, it moves from high to low. Okay, that is down the gradient. Okay. It is slow and it is not targeted. All right. That said, it is effective over small distances. Let's say over cellular distances. Okay, so those are the things that we would need to kind of clue in on or key in on if we were talking about diffusion, or if we were reading a situation and trying to recognize whether diffusion was the process going on or something else. Okay, if the process mentioned things like passive, high to low, down gradient, okay, things like that. What's the other thing about diffusion? What does it transport? The answer is diffusion will transport anything. Okay? Anything and everything can be transported via diffusion. Okay? Alright, it'll transport anything. Alright, osmosis. In contrast to being able to transport everything, osmosis will only move water. Okay, does osmosis move water within the cell, or is it across a membrane? It's across a membrane, right? Why does the water move across the membrane? What is it trying to do? Balance salt, okay? So this is another thing that seeks a balance, okay? Diffusion is also something that's going to seek a balance. Whenever you move down the gradient, okay, you're trying to get balance. You're trying to even things out. All right? So balance salt concentrations. Okay. Is this an active or a passive process? Passive. Okay. Requires no energy. Okay. In fact, we have no control over it whatsoever. Okay. If you look at a slug, for example, right? If you pour salt on a slug, it shrivels up. Why does it shrivel up? Because it can't control osmosis. Osmosis just happens. Okay, and same thing happens with us. If we drink salt water, we'll die, okay, because we can't stop the process of osmosis drawing water out of our cells in order to balance all the salt that we've consumed to allow us to urinate out all the salt, okay, which is why you would eventually die of thirst if you drank, okay, only salt water and not fresh water. Everyone follow me there? Okay, so it's a passive process. All right, active transport, obviously, with the word active in it, we know is active. That means it requires energy. What does active transport do? Caroline? Okay, it's not necessarily to eat food. That's phagocytosis. That's a different thing. Okay, if we're using active transport, we're pumping stuff across the membrane. And anything can be transported, okay, by active transport. Okay, and in this case, we're pumping against the gradient. Okay, so diffusion and osmosis will achieve balance. You'll have the same amount everywhere with those two. Active transport achieves imbalance. Okay? It is the only way for imbalance to happen. All right? And usually what we're trying to do with that imbalance is get more of something in the cell than there is outside of the cell. We're actively pumping something in most of the time with active transport. Okay? So, important that we recognize those kind of key identifiers for each one so that we would be able to apply our knowledge to the hypothetical scenario or scenarios I might give you. All right. Okay, what are we on here? 5. Okay, 6. Okay, cell size and transport. We did a little activity on that with the cubes. Okay, and we found that as a cell gets bigger, its volume increases way faster than its surface area. Okay, so one of the big points of this was the surface area to volume ratio. And as a cell gets bigger, volume increases faster than this. The reason that's bad, a small cell, diffusion doesn't have to move stuff very far because there's very little volume and lots of surface area by comparison. Okay? In a big cell, sure, there's also more surface area, but there's way more volume. All right? And as a result, it's going to take longer to transport material through the cell because what does the cell use inside the cell for transport? Diffusion. Okay, so this stuff relates back to diffusion. Okay, the problem with diffusion, it's great if cells are small. It doesn't work as well over big distances. All right, if you imagine these two cells here, okay, and in each one, I'm trying to transport that much stuff over to here. All right, so in this one here, same idea. I'm trying to transport it all the way over to here. Well, here's the problem. Diffusion causes stuff to spread out as it moves. Agreed? We said it was kind of like a fart, right? If somebody farted, okay, if you were really close by, it was really strong. But if you're on the other side of the room, it wasn't too bad. Okay, well, as diffusion transports this stuff, okay, it gets diffused, it gets diffuse, okay, or less concentrated, but it probably gets there. If I've got that same amount of stuff in this big cell, by the time it gets over here, it's taken way longer to do that, and not as much of it actually gets where it's supposed to go. Okay, remember, the drawbacks of diffusion are it's slow and it's not targeted. The benefits of diffusion, it's free and it works just fine over small distances, and most of your cells are small. All right, so there will probably be some sort of real-world application of that concept on the exam. All right, then we talked about multicellularity. All right, what you need to remember, the advantages of multicellularity. Okay, and that goes back to the thing we just talked about, cell size and transport. If you're multicellular, all your cells are small, and you don't have any trouble transporting things. It allows you to get very big without having to deal with the problems of being a very big single cell. Okay, so, all right, it allows you to get bigger. But the most important advantage of being multicellular is you have something single-celled organisms do not. What is it? Specialization, right? Okay, specialization, I think we also called it division of labor. Okay, you have some cells in your body that do a certain job, and they do it very well because they are specialized to do so. Okay, you have other cells in your body that do a different job, and they do it very well because they're slightly different than the other cells in your body. If you are a prokaryotic organism, you only have one cell, and that one cell has to carry out all of your basic functions. Okay? It's probably not going to do them all really, really well. Okay? Everybody with me there? All right, so that's the benefit of multicellularity. Specialization, okay, allowing stuff to get bigger, okay? There's also to some extent, okay, a lot more diversity within multicellular organisms. Okay, transport in plants. That was the next thing we talked about. Parts of the plant, essentially, was what we talked about. Okay, so transport in plants. Okay, we need to remember the parts of the plants. Okay, we got the roots. Okay, we got the stem. And we've got the leaves. Okay, know what each part of the plant is responsible for. Okay. Beyond that, we should probably know the parts of the stem. Right? Those two things are pretty important parts of the stem. The phloem and the xylem. One transports water up the plant. One transports sugar down the plant. Should we know how they do that? Yes. Okay? There are a lot of marks on this unit exam about plant transport. Right? In the xylem, okay, or in the plant, the force that moves the water is osmosis, as well as water is it's a polar molecule, and as a result it uses hydrogen bonds, and that causes that cohesion and adhesion. Okay? That is a process you must be able to explain. Okay? You must be able to explain how all of those processes work together to move water up the plant in the xylem. Okay? So go over that, write it out in your own words in detail, okay? Because it's something you're going to have to explain on this exam. All right. Within the leaves, should you know the parts of the leaf? Yeah. Okay. We need to know about the palisade layer. Okay. We need to know about the spongy layer. Okay. We need to know about the cuticle. All right. You got the waxy. You got the cuticle. Okay. The cuticle is secreted by the epidermis. Okay, so that's important. And then, of course, you've got the guard cells. Okay, and the guard cells make up the stomate. Okay, those are all important. One of the other things that's really important is showing your understanding of how plants conserve water. All right, we've talked about how they transport it, but we also talked about they have special structures and adaptations that help them to keep water in. All right, cuticle is one of those things. The guard cells and the stomates, okay, are another part of those things. All right, where the stomates are is part of that. Okay, are stomates usually on the top of the leaf or the bottom of the leaf? Usually on the bottom. That's where it's shady. There's less evaporation there. Okay? Be able to explain to me how the stomate works. Okay? And that is in lesson 11 on multicellularity. All right, so make sure you go over how the stomate works, because I almost always ask, what are some of the adaptations of a plant that might help it to save water? All right, and so you'd have to explain to me, here's a couple of things the plant has, here's how they work, and here's how they prevent water from escaping the plant. Everyone with me there? All right, so that's transport within plants. Okay, and the reason we go over transport in plants is because it shows us evidence of those specialized cells within a multicellular organism. All right, other thing we talked about, what are we on now? 8, 9. Okay, we talked about plant growth and development. Just need to know what the roots do. We didn't talk about them much other than what do they do, right? Anchorage and acquisition of water. Oh, sorry, I did skip one thing about the roots. There's two kinds of roots. Seeing as how I forgot about that, it's probably not tested heavily on the exam. Okay. All right. So plant growth and development. In this one, we talked about the tropisms. Okay, so I would say you'll need to be able to identify from a picture and description what kind of tropism is going on in a given situation. So I'm going to show you a picture of a warped plant, and you're going to have to tell me, based on the description of how the plant ended up looking like that, what tropism happened. Okay, so it's critical thinking, applying your knowledge. All right, what are the three tropisms? Geotropism, phototropism, and thigmotropism. What do all tropisms have in common? Caroline. They change the shape, right, of the plant. The plant has to bend in every single one of these things. How does the plant make that happen? Okay, that's one of the things you guys need to look up. You need to look up the mechanism, okay, for what we'll call differential growth. Maybe we'll even say differential rate of growth. Okay, how does a plant do that? Because that's how tropisms happen. Okay, plants have to have different rates of growth. Okay, you guys need to look that one up. It's in the notes in the podcast. Okay, so make sure you go over that. Okay, and then the last thing we talked about were factors affecting plant growth. Sorry, one other thing we talked about in here, and sorry, in plant growth and development, you need to know the plant hormones. Okay, got to know the plant hormones. Again, I'll probably give you a picture of a plant and a description and say which of the hormones we talked about in class would be most responsible in this situation and how would that have worked. All right, so make sure you know all the different plant hormones. Right, so the auxins, the gibberellins, the cytokinins, okay, ethylene, right, abscisic acid. Make sure you know them, what they do, okay, what their role is. All right, factors affecting plant growth. Okay, basically we just need to know essentially how does a plant adapt to changes in its environment. All right, how does it, is wind a factor? Is soil a factor? Is water a factor? How are they factors? What do they do? How does the plant adapt to changes in those factors? Okay, so you might have to explain something like that, or right, and that's kind of what we worked on yesterday with that plant growth lab design. Okay, that's it. 10 kind of main concepts or main topics in this unit. All right, now, detail. Okay, this test, it's not as trying, let's say, as the chem exam, but it's involved. Okay, and what I mean by that is you have to do a lot more writing on this one because there's a lot more explaining, okay, in this exam, whereas in the chem exam was a lot of, well, I just have to do that calculation or write in those numbers or stuff like that. There wasn't as much explaining in the chem one, but there's a lot more explaining in this one. So there are 25 multiple choice questions. And there are 9 written. The whole test is out of 79. All right, so there's 54 marks in the written response, which part should you do first? Definitely do the written first. All right. When I made up the key for this, it took me about 22 minutes. All right, which puts it, okay, kind of on the longer end, okay, of exams for you. All right, so you're going to need to watch your time. Okay, don't get too long. I mean, I shouldn't say don't get too long-winded. I don't want to say it that way, but make sure you write down the key things for each question. Okay. In fact, you might just want to make a little quick list. When you read the question, go, okay, I'll probably need to talk about these 4 things. Make sure you talk about those 4 things, but don't ramble. All right. The problem I see most often in the Unit 2 exam is people don't know for sure what to write, so they write everything, even if it contradicts something else they've written for the same question. All right. If you contradict yourself in your answer's wrong. Because what does that tell me? It tells me you didn't know the answer, but you wrote down everything you knew in the hope that something you wrote was right. Okay? And that's not the way it works. That will A, have you run out of time, and B, not do you any good anyway. All right? So make sure you kind of, here's the 3 things I should talk about. If it's out of 3 marks, there's probably 3 things to talk about. If it's out of 5 marks, there's probably, 3 things and an explanation of them or something along those lines. Okay? Now, stuff that's going to appear in the multiple choice. Okay? Some stuff about the microscope. Okay, the use of the microscope. Okay, some stuff about functioning of cells. Okay, parts of the cell in the multiple choice. There's some pictures of various like plants and cells, and then there's questions that go with those pictures. A little bit of stuff about the people involved with the cell theory. We already said that. Again, lots of stuff about parts of the cell. Then there's some stuff about transport within the cell, transport within multicellular organisms, and a few things about growth and development of plants. Okay, again, just multiple choice questions. For your written response, okay, again, the same stuff we talked about here. Okay, you got to tell me about how plants adapt to their environment. Okay, that could be how they grow or how they regulate their water loss. Okay, things like that. Again, tropism stuff. How does the tropisms happen? Okay, labeling of the cell. We already said lab drawing. Parts of the plant and what they do. Okay, cellular transport, plant growth and development, and cell size and functioning. Okay. So make sure you go over all of that stuff. Now I'm going to give you a handout here that's got some old exam questions on it, okay, things like that. Be aware, on this exam, there are lots of pictures, okay, and they're all in color. Okay, the cell diagram is in color, all the pictures of plants and cells and whatever else, they're all in color, so they're easy to see, they're nice and clear. You won't have any problem just discerning what's going on, okay, with any of the questions to do with the pictures. Now, before I give you the handouts, are there any questions? No. Yes. Okay, so the major concepts part here is kind of the things that we just talked about. Okay, cell size, transport, cellular transport process, cell structure and function, methods of acquiring energy or modes of nutrition, okay, how they relate to cell structure. So these are the things that you should look over in your notes, okay? Maybe write some notes of your own about, okay? Minor concepts, okay, tropisms, applying your knowledge of cell transport, multicellularity, okay, those things. And then there's some example questions. Most of these are old exam questions, okay? So number 1, summarize the differences between plant and animal cells. Be thorough, focus on their mode of nutrition and the structure of their cells, okay? Cell diagram, that would require you to do some labeling. The chart to fill in is on the next page. Wonderful. Okay, well, you've got it there. You can see it on the next page. Okay. Okay, and then, again, some of these are just old exam questions. Explain how plant hormones could be used to destroy plants rather than benefit them. Okay, describe the tropisms, the 2 different modes of nutrition. Okay, like we said, expect lots of diagrams. Terminology, okay, make sure you can define those kinds of things there. All right. And then here's you got a picture of an amoeba, and I want you to draw a lab drawing of it. Listen to the 3 points of the cell theory. All right. Last time I gave you one of these, Did questions from it end up on the test? Yes. I'm a creature of habit. So, advisable to do this. Okay, you got lots of time because I'm giving you the rest of class, and your exam is until Monday. It's only Wednesday. All right, so you got lots of time to look over this stuff, and then maybe come in and ask in scheduled help tomorrow. Okay, or even on Monday. Right? Obviously, there's no scheduled help Friday, but okay, you can always come in and ask for help. Okay, scheduled help or at lunch. Okay, but take advantage. You know what kind of things are going to be on this test. Okay, all right, have at her.